The sound of her laughter still echoes in my head, not the kind of laugh you share over a joke, but sharp, cutting, and laced with something sinister. It was the laugh of someone who knew they'd won before the game even started. I stood frozen in the hallway, just out of sight, clutching a stack of mail I had no intention of reading. Kayla was in the living room, on the phone. Her voice carried an edge of amusement, like she was performing for an audience. "He thinks he's so clever," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But honestly, it's pathetic. He'll never leave. He needs me. He couldn't function without me." A pause, followed by another laugh, louder this time. "You don't understand. He's completely hooked, mentally, physically. He's mine, and he knows it." I felt my chest tighten, anger and confusion battling for control. I wanted to storm into the room, demand to know what the hell she was talking about, but something held me back. Instinct, maybe. Or the gnawing fear that I wasn't ready to hear the answer. Instead, I stood there, listening as she lowered her voice, the words coming through in fragments. "No, not yet. I told you, he's too predictable to notice. Please, I've got this under control." Another pause, then a coy chuckle. "And don't worry. He won't find out unless I want him to." The room started spinning. My grip on the mail tightened until the edges of the envelopes crumpled in my hands. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, or maybe I could. Somewhere deep down, I'd known something was wrong for months. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her late nights. The way her phone was always face down. The growing distance between us that no amount of effort seemed to close. But this? This was something else entirely. I took a step back, careful not to make a sound. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her conversation. Who was she talking to? What wouldn't I notice? And why was she so confident that I'd never leave? I retreated to the kitchen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air, but I barely noticed. Kayla's words played on a loop in my mind, each one stabbing deeper than the last. By the time she hung up, I had made up my mind. Whatever she thought she was hiding, whatever power she thought she had over me, it ended now. She thought I was predictable, weak, too blind to see the truth. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't confront her that night. Confrontation, I realized, was exactly what she'd expect. She thought she had me pegged, the naive husband too meek to question her lies. But if I was going to take her down, I needed to be smarter than that. Instead, I played along, pretending everything was fine. I smiled at her jokes over dinner, asked about her day like I cared, even kissed her goodnight with a calmness that bordered on terrifying. Beneath the surface, though, I was anything but calm. Every word she spoke, every movement she made, felt like a test, and I hated how easily she fooled me into believing this facade for so long. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone, always glued to her hand, was sitting on the nightstand. Locked, of course, but I didn't need access to it. I only needed the number she had been calling the night before. It was right there in the recent calls list, unknown. No name, just a number. I jotted it down on a scrap of paper and tucked it into my wallet, my hands trembling with adrenaline. I had no idea what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I had to start somewhere. Kayla breezed into the room a few minutes later, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping water onto the hardwood floor. "You're up early," she said, her voice light and casual. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. She didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, which both relieved and infuriated me. Did she really think I was this stupid? That I'd never catch on to her games? Later that day, while she was out running errands, a phrase that had started to sound like a joke every time she said it, I called the number. The phone rang twice before a man's voice answered, low and gruff. "Who is this?" he asked, the suspicion in his tone immediately putting me on edge. I didn't respond right away. My mouth had gone dry, and my heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it through the line. "Hello," the man snapped. I hung up without saying a word. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. The voice on the other end hadn't given me much, but it had been enough. Whoever he wasn't just some random coworker or harmless friend. No, there was something in his tone, something territorial, almost, that confirmed everything I feared. Kayla was lying to me. She was playing me for a fool. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. That night, I started putting my plan into motion. I logged into our joint bank account and began transferring funds into an account she didn't know existed. It wasn't a lot at first, just small amounts she wouldn't notice. I also began cataloging everything of value in the house, from her designer handbags to the jewelry I'd bought her over the years. It felt cold, calculating, and completely out of character for me, but that was the point. Kayla thought she knew me, thought she could predict my every move. She was about to learn how wrong she was. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. I stood in the darkened kitchen, staring at the list of items on my phone, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. Kayla wanted to believe I needed her, that I couldn't survive without her. But the truth was, she was the one who wouldn't survive without me. And when I was done, she'd finally understand just how little power she really had. The next morning, everything looked normal on the surface. Kayla sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile playing on her lips. It made my stomach turn, knowing she had no idea what was coming. I watched her for a moment, memorizing the scene. She still looked like the woman I had married, same golden hair, same confident posture, but now, all I saw was a stranger. A liar. Any plans today? I asked casually, pouring myself a cup of coffee. She barely glanced up. Just the usual. Errands, maybe meet up with Danny for lunch. Another lie. I nodded like I believed her, sipping my coffee as if nothing was wrong. But behind that calm facade, I was moving faster than ever. I'd already scheduled the transfer of the remaining funds in our joint account, making sure every cent would land safely in my private account by the end of the day. I'd canceled the automatic payments for her college courses the night before. Kayla thought she was running the show, but in reality, she had no idea I was systematically dismantling her world piece by piece. By the time she left the house, I was already packing. I didn't need much, just a few essentials and anything that couldn't be easily replaced. The rest didn't matter. Let her have the furniture, the clothes, the memories. I loaded everything into the car and took one last look around the house. It was strange, standing there in the silence, knowing this was the last time I'd ever see the place. For a moment, I felt a pang of doubt. Was I really doing this? Was I ready to walk away from everything? Then I thought about her words. You'll never leave me. You need my intimacy. Anger surged through me, wiping away any trace of hesitation. Yes, I was doing this. And I was going to make sure she never saw it coming. By noon, I was gone. No goodbye note, no explanation. Just an empty house and a trail of canceled plans in my wake. I drove for hours, heading toward a city where no one knew me. Along the way, I threw my phone out the window, watching as it shattered on the pavement. It was symbolic, in a way, breaking the last chain that tied me to her. The freedom was exhilarating, but it was also terrifying. For the first time in years, I was completely alone, with no safety net and no clear plan. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was that I was finally free. Or so I thought. It wasn't until a year later, when I saw her standing on my doorstep with a baby in her arms, that I realized just how far she was willing to go to drag me back into her twisted game. I'll never forget the look on her face when I opened the door. Smug. Confident. As if she'd already won. In her arms was a baby, a little boy, barely old enough to hold his own head up. He looked nothing like me, but Kayla's eyes sparkled with the kind of twisted satisfaction that told me she didn't care. Surprised to see me, she asked, her tone sickeningly sweet. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to process the scene in front of me. A year. I'd been gone for a year, building a life far away from her chaos. No contact. No clues left behind. And yet, here she was, standing on my doorstep as if she owned the place. You're not even going to invite me in, she continued, shifting the baby to her other arm. That's no way to treat the mother of your child. Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, stunned, the weight of her accusation sinking in. My child. I finally managed to say, my voice low and tight. She laughed, soft, mocking, as if I'd asked the stupidest question imaginable. Of course. Who else's would it be? I glanced at the baby again, my chest tightening. This was a trap. It had to be. I'd done everything right, disappeared without a trace. There was no way this child was mine. Kayla, I said slowly, keeping my voice steady, you're wasting your time. Whatever game you're playing, it won't work. Her smile widened, and for a moment, I saw the predator beneath her polished exterior. Game. Oh, sweetheart, this isn't a game. This is your reality. I suggest you get used to it. She stepped forward, pushing her way into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. I could feel my blood boiling as she breezed past me, her eyes scanning the space like she was evaluating a property she already owned. Not bad, she said, settling onto my couch and bouncing the baby on her knee. A bit minimalist for my taste, but I guess it'll do for now. For now. I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. She looked up at me, feigning surprise. Well, obviously, we'll need to make some adjustments. A nursery, for starters. And I'll need access to your bank account again. Babies aren't cheap, you know. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She hadn't changed at all. If anything, she was worse, more manipulative, more entitled. You're insane, I said, taking a step closer to her. This isn't happening. You need to leave. Now. Her expression hardened, the smugness replaced with a cold, calculated glare. You think you can just throw me out? After everything I've been through? After raising your child alone for a year? I don't believe you, I shot back. You expect me to take your word for it? After everything you've done? Kayla leaned back, a sly smile creeping across her face. Oh, you'll believe me soon enough. A DNA test will clear everything up. And when it does, you'll owe me, big time. The confidence in her voice sent a chill down my spine. She had planned this. Every word, every move, it was all part of her scheme. But what she didn't realize was that I'd spent the past year preparing for a moment like this. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she could walk back into my life and reclaim her throne. She had no idea the war she had just started. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of her presence suffocating the room. Kayla, holding that baby like some kind of weapon, stared at me with a look of smug triumph that made my blood boil. She thought she'd already won. She had no idea what was coming. You're serious about this? I finally asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. Kayla smirked. Dead serious. And the sooner you stop fighting it, the easier this will be, for all of us. All of us. I let out a bitter laugh, pacing the room. You expect me to believe you showed up here out of the goodness of your heart? After disappearing for a year? After everything you said and did? She shrugged, nonchalant as ever. Believe what you want. The fact is, this baby is yours. You're responsible for him, whether you like it or not. And now, I'm here to collect. Collect? I turned to face her, my jaw tightening. What exactly are you trying to collect, Kayla? Money? Sympathy? Control? Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head with mock innocence. All I want is what's fair. A safe home for our child. Financial support. Stability. You know, the things a good father provides. I couldn't believe the audacity of her words. She had torn my life apart, manipulated me, used me, and now she had the nerve to lecture me about being a good father. Get out, I said, my voice cold and final. She stood up, cradling the baby as if preparing for the fight she'd clearly rehearsed in her head. You really think you can just push me out again? I've already spoken to a lawyer, by the way. If you want to play hardball, we can. But trust me, it won't end well for you. Her words didn't scare me. They only confirmed what I already knew, this wasn't about the baby. It was about power. About control. You don't have anything on me, I said firmly, crossing my arms. You can scream lawyer all you want, but you know as well as I do that DNA tests take time. And until I see proof, you're not getting a dime from me. Kayla's eyes narrowed, her facade cracking ever so slightly. You really want to go there? Fine. But when the results come back, don't expect me to be as forgiving as I am now. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Forgiving? You show up here unannounced, with a child I've never met, making demands like you're entitled to my entire life, and you think you're doing me a favor? Her confidence wavered for the first time, but only for a moment. She straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. You can pretend to be tough all you want, but we both know you're still the same predictable man I left behind. You'll cave. You always do. That was it. The switch flipped. She wanted a war. Fine. I was done playing nice. Don't test me, Kayla, I said, my voice deadly calm. You might think you know me, but you don't. Not anymore. And if you want a fight, you'll get one, but you're not going to like how it ends. She stared at me, her confidence flickering, but she didn't back down. Instead, she turned on her heel, heading for the door. This isn't over, she said over her shoulder, her voice laced with venom. Not by a long shot. As the door slammed shut behind her, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. She thought she had control. She thought she could waltz back into my life and call the shots. But this time, I wasn't the same man she had left behind. This time, I was ready. The next few days felt like a chess game with a ticking clock. Kayla's visit had shaken me, but it also fueled a determination I hadn't felt in years. If she thought I was going to roll over and let her dictate the rules, she was in for a rude awakening. The first move was mine. I called a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who specialized in cases like this. I explained everything, from Kayla's sudden reappearance to her claim about the baby. Sarah listened carefully, asking questions that made me realize just how little leverage Kayla actually had. Has she provided any documentation? Proof of paternity? Sarah asked, her tone professional but firm. No, I replied. Just her word. And a lot of threats. Sarah sighed. Typical. Don't let her intimidate you. Without a DNA test, she has nothing. The court won't even entertain her demands until paternity is established. Her words were a relief, but they didn't erase the tension coiled in my chest. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a small measure of control return. The next move was riskier. I hired a private investigator to dig into Kayla's life over the past year. If she was trying to manipulate me, I needed to know exactly what I was up against. It didn't take long for the first cracks in her story to appear. 2 days later, the investigator called with an update. She's been staying in a motel on the outskirts of town, he said. Paid in cash. No job listed, but there's something else you should know. What? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. She's been meeting with a man, mid-30s, well-dressed. They've been seen together multiple times, and he's the one who drops her off at your place. Got a few photos if you're interested. My stomach twisted. Of course, she wasn't doing this alone. Kayla was too calculated for that. But who was this guy? And why was he helping her? Send me everything, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The photos arrived within the hour, and they told a story that made my blood run cold. The man was holding the baby in one shot, smiling at Kayla in another. They didn't look like two people casually working together, they looked like a family. I stared at the pictures, my mind racing. Was this man the baby's father? Was he part of some larger plan? The questions came faster than I could process them, each one more infuriating than the last. The next time Kayla showed up, I was ready. She knocked on the door like she owned the place, the same smug expression plastered across her face. But this time, I didn't feel anger or fear. I felt something colder, sharper. Control. I opened the door and leaned against the frame, blocking her way inside. You've got some nerve coming back here, I said, my voice calm but firm. Her smile faltered, just slightly. We need to talk, she said, holding the baby close. Talk. I gestured to the street behind her. Why don't you call your friend? The one who's been playing house with you. Maybe he has more to say than I do. Kayla's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of panic beneath her cool exterior. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, but her tone betrayed her. "Oh, come on," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the photos. "You didn't think I'd find out? Or were you hoping I'd be too stupid to notice?" Her face turned pale, and she took a step back, clutching the baby like a shield. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You show up here out of nowhere, throwing around accusations, making demands. What did you think was going to happen? That I'd just hand over my life without a fight?" Kayla didn't respond. She was too busy trying to regain her composure, but the cracks were starting to show. "I want a DNA test," I continued, my tone ice-cold. "And until I get the results, you stay the hell away from me. You and your little boyfriend." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. For the first time, she looked like someone who had just realized she was losing control of the game. "This isn't over," she said, her voice trembling with barely concealed rage. "No," I replied, stepping closer, "it's just beginning." I shut the door in her face, her threats still ringing in my ears. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt victory. The door had barely clicked shut when I felt a surge of adrenaline, my heart pounding in my chest. Kayla thought she could walk all over me, play her games, and come out on top. But now, the cracks were showing, and I intended to break her whole charade wide open. I didn't have to wait long for her next move. 3 days later, I got a letter from her lawyer. It was the kind of letter designed to scare someone into submission, a laundry list of demands disguised as negotiations. Child support. Housing arrangements. Joint custody. The sheer audacity of it would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I forwarded the letter to Sarah, my lawyer, and waited for her response. It didn't take long. "She's bluffing," Sarah said over the phone, her voice steady and reassuring. "Without paternity proof, she's got nothing. If she tries to push this in court, it'll backfire. Big time." The confidence in Sarah's voice was enough to keep me calm. But I wasn't just relying on the legal system to handle this. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. The private investigator came through again a few days later. He tracked down the man from the photos. His name was Derek, and he wasn't just some random fling, he had a history with Kayla, going back years before we even met. They'd been on and off, the kind of toxic relationship you'd expect from someone like her. But the bombshell came next. "Derek's been paying for that motel she's staying at," the investigator told me. "And there's something else. He's been bragging to his friends about being a father." I froze, the weight of the words hitting me like a freight train. "You're saying the kid is his?" "It's looking that way," he replied. "But the only way to be sure is the test." The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted was worse than I imagined. Kayla wasn't just lying to me, she was using me. She'd shown up on my doorstep with someone else's baby, counting on my fear and guilt to bankroll her mess of a life. She underestimated just how far I was willing to go to protect myself. The next time she called, I let it go to voicemail. Her message was predictably dramatic, accusing me of dragging things out and threatening to take me to court if I didn't step up soon. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I had my lawyer file for a court-ordered paternity test. It was bold, even risky, but it forced the issue. If she wanted to keep playing this game, she'd have to do it on my terms now. When the court notice arrived at her motel, the explosion was immediate. Kayla called me, her voice shrill with rage. "You had no right to do this," she screamed into the phone. "You're humiliating me." I stayed calm, letting her rant until she finally ran out of steam. "You brought this on yourself," I said, my voice steady. "If the child is mine, the test will prove it. If he's not, well, then we both know the truth, don't we?" Her silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear her scrambling for a response, trying to regain control. But for the first time, she had nothing to say. "You thought I'd just roll over, didn't you?" I continued, my words sharp and deliberate. "You thought you could walk back into my life, make your demands, and I'd give you everything. But you were wrong. This ends now." She hung up without another word, but I knew the damage was done. The test was scheduled, the wheels were in motion, and the truth, whatever it was, would finally come out. I didn't sleep much that night, the anticipation gnawing at me. But it wasn't fear. It was something else. A quiet, simmering determination. Kayla thought she could manipulate me, control me, trap me. She didn't realize she'd just set herself up for the biggest fall of her life. The day of the DNA test arrived, and Kayla showed up looking like she'd dressed for a courtroom drama. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her outfit screamed, "I'm the victim here." She even had the audacity to bring Derek, who lingered near the entrance, arms crossed like some sort of bodyguard. I couldn't help but smirk. If this was her idea of intimidation, it wasn't working. "You're early," she said, her tone dripping with condescension as I walked past her. "I like to be punctual," I replied coolly. The testing process was quick and clinical, swabs, signatures, and a lot of awkward silence. Kayla tried to strike up small talk, painting herself as the concerned mother doing what was best for her child. I ignored her, keeping my focus on the task at hand. When it was over, she shot me a smug look. "You'll regret this, you know. Dragging us all through this circus. But it's fine. The truth will come out soon enough." I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice just enough to make her flinch. "Oh, I'm counting on it." She didn't have a comeback. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. The results wouldn't be ready for a few days, but I wasn't planning to sit around waiting. With the information my investigator had gathered, I decided it was time to take the offensive. The next morning, I paid Derek a little visit. I found him at a local bar, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone. He didn't see me coming until I was standing right in front of him. "Derek, right?" I said, sliding into the seat across from him. His eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Let's skip the introductions," I said, leaning forward. "I know who you are. I know about you and Kayla. And I know that kid is yours." He froze, his expression shifting from surprise to anger. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Save it," I snapped, pulling out the photos the investigator had taken. I slid them across the table, watching as the color drained from his face. "You've been playing daddy for months. Don't bother denying it." Derek's jaw tightened, and he shoved the photos back toward me. "So what? What do you want?" "What I want," I said, my voice low and steady, "is for you to explain why Kayla's dragging me into your mess. She's claiming the kid is mine, and I'm not about to let her ruin my life over your mistakes." He hesitated, his tough guy act faltering. "She said you were too spineless to fight back," he muttered. That stung, but I didn't let it show. "Guess she was wrong," I replied. "So, here's the deal. You either step up and take responsibility for your kid, or I'll make sure the whole world knows what kind of man you are. Starting with Kayla." Derek glared at me, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't just mad, he was scared. "Fine," he finally muttered. "But don't think this makes us buddies or something." "Don't worry," I said, standing up. "The last thing I want is to be friends with someone like you." As I walked out of the bar, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. Derek was cracking under the pressure, and Kayla's carefully constructed story was starting to unravel. 2 days later, the test results came in. I sat in Sarah's office, my hands clenched into fists as she opened the envelope. She scanned the paper, her expression unreadable, before sliding it across the desk. "It's not yours," she said simply. Relief hit me like a tidal wave, but it was quickly followed by a surge of anger. Kayla had dragged me through hell, all based on a lie. "Now," Sarah continued, her voice calm but firm, "it's time to make sure she pays for it." She didn't have to tell me twice. Kayla thought she'd played her cards perfectly, but she had no idea what was coming next. Armed with the DNA results, I was ready to end this nightmare once and for all. Kayla had been brazen, manipulative, and outright malicious, but now, I had the upper hand. And I wasn't going to waste it. I filed a counterclaim with the court immediately, citing fraud, emotional distress, and financial damages. Sarah assured me we had a solid case, especially with the evidence from the private investigator and the DNA test. Kayla wanted a war. She was about to get one. When she showed up for the hearing a week later, her confidence had taken a noticeable hit. Derek was nowhere to be seen, and the smugness that usually radiated from her was replaced by something else, unease. The judge wasn't in the mood for games. After reviewing the DNA results and hearing my side of the story, he turned to Kayla with a look that could cut through steel. "Mrs. Jensen," he said, his tone sharp, "you knowingly presented false claims against Mr. Jensen, using a child that is not biologically his to extract financial support. This is not only unethical, it's illegal." Kayla stammered, her carefully rehearsed excuses crumbling under the weight of the evidence. I didn't know for sure," she finally managed, her voice trembling. I thought. "Don't insult this court's intelligence," the judge interrupted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And now, you'll face the consequences." The ruling was swift and brutal. Kayla was ordered to pay back every cent she'd taken from me during our marriage, funds I had used to cover her education, her lifestyle, and everything else she'd claimed was for our future. The judge also approved my claim for emotional damages, adding a significant financial penalty on top of her repayment. But the cherry on top. The judge granted a restraining order, barring Kayla from contacting me ever again. The look on her face as the verdict was read was priceless, a mix of rage, shock, and sheer disbelief. She had come into this thinking she could bully and manipulate her way to victory, but now, she was the one left humiliated and powerless. Outside the courthouse, she tried one last desperate move. As I walked to my car, she called out after me, her voice shrill and panicked. "You can't do this to me. I need help. I'm a mother, for God's sake." I turned to face her, the weight of everything she'd put me through bubbling to the surface. For a moment, I said nothing, letting her words hang in the air. Then I smiled, a cold, hollow smile that mirrored everything I felt. "You're right, Kayla. You are a mother. So maybe it's time you learn how to take care of someone other than yourself." Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her empire of lies crumbling around her. As I drove home, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from Kayla, but from the weight of everything she had tried to impose on me. She thought she could control me, manipulate me, break me. But in the end, I was the one who walked away. And she was the one left behind, picking up the pieces of a life she had destroyed with her own lies. The months that followed felt like stepping into a new life, a life free from Kayla's games, her manipulation, and the constant sense of walking on eggshells. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Kayla, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. News of her courtroom humiliation spread quickly in our circles. Mutual acquaintances distanced themselves, her so-called friends disappeared, and Derek, well, it turned out he wasn't as loyal as she'd hoped. He vanished shortly after the court ruling, leaving her alone with the child she'd weaponized against me. I didn't feel sorry for her. She'd built her life on lies and manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences. The money she owed me wasn't just a financial burden, it was a constant reminder that her schemes had failed. But the true victory wasn't about money or revenge. It was about reclaiming my peace, my dignity, and my ability to trust myself. For so long, I doubted my instincts, questioned my worth, and let Kayla's poison seep into every corner of my life. Walking away, and staying gone, had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most liberating. One day, as I sat on the back porch of my new home, far away from the city where Kayla and I had once lived, I got an email from Sarah. Attached was the final documentation confirming that all repayments from Kayla had been received. It was the last thread tying me to her, and now it was gone. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the weight of it settle in. Then I deleted the email, leaned back in my chair, and watched the sun dip below the horizon. Kayla had once told me, "You'll never leave me. You need my intimacy." Those words had haunted me, taunted me, fueled my anger and pain. But now, they were nothing more than an echo of a life I'd left behind. I didn't need her. I never had. As the cool evening breeze brushed past me, I smiled to myself, not out of spite, but out of relief. The war was over. And I had won.